No one believed it at first. Uniformed police tasing a blind veteran and his loyal German shepherd in the middle of a crowded street. But when the military convoy arrived just 7 minutes later, everything changed. This story proves one thing: sometimes heroes have to rescue each other. It was supposed to be a simple morning walk. Sergeant Thomas Bennett, retired after 25 years in the Army, made his way down Main Street with Max guiding him carefully around the crowds. His white cane tapped rhythmically against the pavement, each step measured and sure. Max wore his dark blue K9 vest embroidered with gold letters. Service dog. Do not distract. The big shepherd kept his nose close to Thomas's leg, occasionally glancing up to ensure his partner was steady. Together they'd walked this route 100 times before, but today felt different. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. As they approached the corner near Oak Ridge National Bank, Thomas could sense a shift in the air. Murmured voices grew sharper, footsteps shuffled behind him. Max's body tensed beneath the harness, a soft growl rumbling low in his throat. "Easy, buddy," Thomas murmured, resting his free hand on the dog's head. But even without sight, he knew they were being watched. He could feel it in the hairs prickling on his neck. The morning had started like any other in the small town of Oak Ridge, Virginia. Thomas woke at 0600 hours. Military habits die hard, and felt Max's warm muzzle already nudging his hand. The German shepherd's internal clock was even more precise than his own. "Good morning to you too," Thomas had said, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur. Max responded with a gentle lick to his wrist, their private ritual. Thomas had chosen his usual attire, pressed khaki pants and a navy button-down that Sarah, his sister, had described as bringing out what little gray hadn't taken over his hair yet. At 52, Thomas wore his age and experience with quiet dignity. Their destination had been Veterans Corner, the cafe where Thomas liked to sit in the mornings. The owner, Jim Peterson, always saved the corner table, the one with its back to the wall and a clear view of both entrances. Not that Thomas could see the entrances anymore, but old habits from deployment stayed with him. Max had been particularly attentive that morning, pausing twice to let Thomas adjust his grip on the harness. The dog had a way of anticipating Thomas's needs before Thomas himself recognized them. When Thomas's knee, damaged by the same IED that took his sight, began to ache, Max would subtly slow their pace. When Thomas's mind wandered to darker places, Max would press closer to his side, the pressure a gentle reminder: you are not alone. The route to the cafe was exactly 0.8 miles from Thomas's modest bungalow on Elm Street. They'd walked it in every season, through summer heat, autumn leaves, spring showers. Max knew every crack in the sidewalk, every potential obstacle. His training was impeccable, but it was his devotion that truly set him apart. Now, as they stood at the corner of Main and Oak, something felt wrong. Max's ears had shifted from their relaxed position to full alert, radar dishes scanning for danger. The dog's breathing had slowed, a sign he was focused, assessing. Thomas tightened his grip on both the harness and his white cane. A squad car pulled up behind them with a screech of tires. A door slammed. That was the moment Thomas knew this walk would end very differently. The helicopter blades whipped dust into miniature tornadoes as Thomas Bennett, then Staff Sergeant Bennett, felt the medical evacuation team lift his stretcher. 5 years ago in Afghanistan's Helmand province, but the memory remained as vivid as yesterday. "Stay with me, Bennett." The medic's voice competed with the helicopter's roar. "Your dog saved your life. You gotta live to thank him." Max had been at his side that fateful morning in Afghanistan, just as he'd been every day since they were paired in the military working dog program. What had started as a routine patrol through a village that intelligence had marked as cleared turned catastrophic when their unit encountered an unexpected IED. Thomas remembered the moment with perfect clarity, the way Max had suddenly stopped, ears forward, body rigid. The dog's training kicked in as he detected the faint chemical signature that human senses could never perceive. Max had given the passive alert, sitting abruptly and staring at Thomas with intense focus. "Hold!" Thomas had called to the unit, raising his fist in the universal signal to stop. The men behind him froze as Thomas approached his dog cautiously. "What is it, boy?" Max's eyes never left Thomas's face, but his muzzle inclined slightly toward a disturbed patch of earth 10 feet ahead. Standard procedure dictated they should retreat and call in EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Thomas had just keyed his radio when the first shots rang out. The ambush came from a compound they'd passed minutes earlier. In the chaos that followed, Thomas had pushed Max behind a crumbling wall for protection. But Max, trained to protect his handler at all costs, wouldn't stay put. A sniper had Thomas in his sights. The shot would have been fatal, center mass, if Max hadn't lunged at precisely that moment, knocking Thomas sideways. The bullet found flesh, but not its intended target. Max yelped once, a sound that would haunt Thomas's nightmares for years to come. Even wounded, the dog remained operational, staying between Thomas and the unseen sniper. Then came the second explosion, closer, more devastating. Thomas remembered a blinding flash, pressure like the hand of God crushing down, and then darkness. Darkness that never lifted. Colonel William Hargrove had been the first officer to visit Thomas in the military hospital in Germany. Thomas had still been heavily bandaged, his world newly dark and terrifying. "Your dog is going to make it, Bennett," were Hargrove's first words. No platitudes about Thomas's condition, no false reassurances. Just the one thing Thomas needed to hear. "Where is he, sir?" Thomas had asked, his voice raw from the ventilator tube that had been removed only hours earlier. "Recovery, 2 doors down." Took a round through his shoulder, but these Belgian Malinois German Shepherd crosses are tough as nails. "The vet says he'll have full mobility." Thomas remembered the relief washing over him, more potent than any painkiller. "Need to see him, sir?" "You will, but first we need to talk about Max's future. And yours." That was when Colonel Hargrove explained that Max wasn't just any military working dog. He was part of an elite program, 7 dogs specially trained for complex threat detection and handler protection. Their capabilities were classified, their training representing millions in investment. Standard protocol would be to reassign him, Hargrove had said, his voice neutral. "But I've reviewed his behavior during the incident. He violated direct commands to stay in cover because he sensed the sniper targeting you. That's beyond training. That's something we can't program." Thomas had turned his bandaged face toward Hargrove's voice. "Sir, I'm recommending Max retire with you. You two have a connection that our trainers have been trying to achieve for years. We'd be fools to break it. Besides, you'll need him now more than ever." The colonel's words proved prophetic. The months of rehabilitation that followed tested every ounce of Thomas's resolve. Learning to navigate in darkness, to interpret the world through sound, smell, and touch, it would have broken him without Max. The dog adapted to his new role seamlessly. No longer searching for explosives or enemy combatants, Max now guided Thomas through a different kind of minefield, the everyday world that had become suddenly hostile to a blind man. Thomas remembered the first time he tried to shower alone in the rehabilitation facility. His spatial awareness still compromised, he had slipped and fallen hard against the tile. Before he could call for help, Max, who had been waiting anxiously outside the bathroom door, was barking for assistance. A nurse found Thomas minutes later, with Max standing guard, refusing to leave his side even as water soaked his fur. By the time Thomas received his discharge papers, Max had already mastered the essentials of service dog protocols. The military spared no expense in his retraining, bringing in the best civilian service dog trainers to supplement Max's existing skill set. "This dog is exceptional," one trainer had told Thomas. "Most service dogs take years to develop this level of intuitive response. It's like he reads your mind." Not mind reading, Thomas knew. Just the deep connection forged in the crucible of war and recovery. Max knew Thomas's breathing patterns, could sense the subtle tension in his body that preceded anxiety or pain. The dog had learned to guide him with gentle pressure against his leg, to find exits in unfamiliar buildings, to retrieve dropped items with astonishing precision. Their retirement to Oak Ridge had been Colonel Hargrove's suggestion. Small town, tight community, close to the VA Medical Center in Richmond if you need it. "I've got connections there if you run into trouble." The colonel had also ensured that Thomas's military ID contained something special, a tracking chip linked to a rapid response protocol. "Just a precaution," Hargrove had explained. "Veterans with disabilities sometimes encounter misunderstandings. If you ever mention my name during an emergency, it triggers an alert." Thomas had laughed it off then. "What, like the cavalry comes riding in?" "Something like that," Hargrove had replied, not laughing. "The program is classified, but let's just say we take care of our own." Those words seemed distant now, a conversation from another lifetime as Thomas settled into civilian routine in Oak Ridge. Most days passed peacefully. He volunteered at the local VA office twice a week, counseling younger veterans. Max became a beloved fixture in town, with children asking permission to pet him. Always denied while he was working, but occasionally granted during off-duty hours in the park. Thomas had found unexpected community in Oak Ridge. His neighbors learned quickly that he valued independence. Offers of help were appreciated but rarely accepted. What he couldn't handle, Max could. The German Shepherd knew every inch of their home, every step of their regular routes through town. He could retrieve specific items from the refrigerator, bring Thomas his phone if it rang, even help with laundry by pulling clothes from the dryer. Yet for all his skills, Max's most important function remained vigilance. The dog's situational awareness had saved Thomas from countless minor hazards, approaching cyclists, low-hanging branches, sidewalk construction. But on this morning, as they stood at the corner of Main and Oak, Max sensed a different kind of danger. And for the first time since Afghanistan, Thomas felt the dog's muscles coil with the same tension he'd displayed moments before the ambush that changed both their lives forever. "Sir, stop right there," a voice barked, sharp and commanding. Thomas halted, tightening his grip on Max's harness. He turned his head slightly, trying to place the officer by sound alone. "I'm not moving," Thomas said calmly, though his pulse had started to hammer. "I'm a veteran. I'm blind. My dog is a service animal." "Identification," the officer demanded. Footsteps approached quickly, boots grinding against the asphalt. "Hand over your ID." Thomas swallowed, lifting his chin. "You'll find it in my left breast pocket, but you'll need to take it yourself. I can't see you." Max's low growl grew louder. The dog's body pressed protectively against Thomas's leg. Around them, curious bystanders were beginning to gather, their voices hushed but urgent. "Look, he's blind," someone murmured. Another officer joined in, voice edged with impatience. "Sir, we have reports of a suspicious individual with a dog casing storefronts. We need you to cooperate." "I'm not casing anything," Thomas said, frustration rising. "I've walked this route for years. My dog is trained to help me." In that moment, Thomas felt the familiar swirl of emotions that had become his constant companions since losing his sight. The indignity of being considered suspicious for simply existing in public space. The exhaustion of constantly explaining his disability. The rage, carefully contained but always simmering, at a world that seemed determined to misunderstand him. Do they think I chose this? The thought surfaced unbidden. Do they think I wanted to come home broken? Thomas breathed deeply, using the calming techniques his therapist had taught him. Focus on what you can control. Max sensed the change in his breathing pattern and adjusted his stance, still alert but marginally less tense. "Officer," Thomas tried again, his voice deliberately steady. "My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm a retired Army sergeant. I lost my sight in Afghanistan. This is Max, my service dog. He's not a threat to anyone unless they threaten me." Thomas could hear the scuffle of hands reaching for his ID, the harsh whisper of radios crackling with updates. Max shifted, muscles coiled, ready to defend. All around them, the sidewalk fell into tense silence, broken only by the steady whine in Max's throat, half warning, half plea for someone to understand. Thomas's mind raced through his options. He knew from bitter experience how quickly these situations could escalate. Since returning home, he'd heard too many stories of misunderstandings between law enforcement and veterans with disabilities, had attended too many funerals that could have been prevented with patience and proper training. "William would understand," Thomas said quietly, almost to himself. It was a habit he'd developed in moments of stress, invoking Colonel Hargrove's name like a talisman, a reminder that someone in authority had once seen his value, had respected his sacrifice. "What was that?" The officer's voice sharpened. "Who's William?" Thomas shook his head slightly. "Just an old commanding officer. He always said to stay calm in confrontations. Sir, I need you to control your dog." The officer's tone had shifted from authoritative to nervous. Thomas could hear it, the slight tremor that indicated the man was uncomfortable around large dogs. Under different circumstances, Thomas might have felt sympathy. Now, it only increased his alarm. "He's doing his job," Thomas explained, trying to keep his voice even. "He senses that I'm tense. If you'd step back a bit, he'll relax." But the officer didn't step back. Instead, Thomas heard the distinctive sound of equipment being unholstered. Not a gun, thank God, but something equally concerning. "Last warning. Control the animal or I will." Thomas felt a cold sweat break out across his back. "Officer, please." "He's a service dog. It's illegal to interfere with him. Just let me explain." "Jason, hold up." A new voice entered the conversation, female, authoritative. "Sir, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Can you tell me where you're headed this morning?" Thomas released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Veterans Corner Cafe. I go there every morning. Ask Jim, the owner. He knows me." "The dog seems aggressive," the first officer, Jason, insisted. "He's not aggressive. He's protective," Thomas countered. "That's his training. If you just give us some space." "I don't like how he's looking at me," Officer Jason cut in. Thomas couldn't help himself. A short, bitter laugh escaped him. "Well, that makes one of us who can see his expression." The comment was a mistake. Thomas felt the atmosphere shift immediately. The female officer's sigh told him she was losing control of the situation. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated, but sarcasm isn't helping," she said. "Neither is threatening a blind man and his service dog," Thomas retorted, his patience fraying. Years of carefully managing his emotions in public, of swallowing indignities large and small, suddenly seemed too heavy a burden. In his darkest moments during rehabilitation, Thomas had wondered if it would have been better not to survive. To have died in that sun-baked village with his sight intact rather than living in perpetual darkness. Max had been his lifeline then, nudging him back from the brink with persistent, unconditional devotion. Now, on a sidewalk in his adopted hometown, Thomas felt that same despair threatening to engulf him. The unfairness of it all, to have survived war only to be treated like a criminal for walking down the street, was almost too much to bear. William always said America forgets its veterans until parade day, Thomas muttered, his words barely audible. He keeps mentioning this, William, Officer Jason said to his partner. Possible mental health issue? That was the final straw. The suggestion that his traumatic brain injury might include mental instability was a stigma Thomas had fought against for years. The implication stung worse than any physical wound. My mental health is fine, Thomas said coldly. My patience, however, is not. I've cooperated fully. I've identified myself. I've explained my dog's function. What more do you want from me? The tension in Max's body had reached a critical point. Thomas could feel it through the harness, the dog's muscles trembling with the effort of restraint. Max had been trained to protect Thomas, but also to obey commands. The conflicting imperatives were taxing the animal's discipline. "Easy, Max," Thomas whispered, stroking the dog's head with his free hand. "Easy, boy. We're okay." But they weren't okay. Thomas knew it. Max knew it. The gathering crowd knew it. This confrontation was sliding toward a dangerous conclusion. "I'm going to call my sister," Thomas said, reaching slowly for his pocket. "She can verify who I am." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Officer Jason shouted. Thomas froze. The command, so similar to what he'd heard in combat zones, triggered a cascade of physiological responses. His heart rate spiked. His breathing shortened. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild autumn air. Max sensed the change immediately. The dog shifted position, angling his body between Thomas and the perceived threat. The growl deepened, no longer a warning but a promise. "Officer, please," Thomas tried once more, his voice strained. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't need to exist. I'm just a blind veteran walking to get coffee, that's all." "Sir, step away from the dog." Officer Jason's voice had taken on a rehearsed quality, as if he were reading from a manual. "I can't. He's my guide dog. He's attached to me." Thomas lifted his left hand slightly, showing the harness connection. "This is how it works." "Then I'll need to detach him." Those words sent a spike of pure terror through Thomas. Separation from Max in an already tense situation would leave him completely vulnerable. More than vulnerable. It would leave him without his eyes, without his security, without the one constant that had made life bearable since the darkness descended. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You will not separate me from my service animal. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." "Officer Mills," Rodriguez interjected, "let's take a step back." "Sir, perhaps we could—" But Officer Mills had made his decision. Thomas heard the distinctive sound of a taser being readied, the slight whine of capacitors charging. "The dog is showing aggression," Mills stated flatly. "Department policy authorizes non-lethal force against aggressive animals." "Max isn't aggressive," Thomas was shouting now, his composure shattered. "He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. William would never allow this. Colonel Hargrove would have you discharged for this." The name dropped like a stone into still water. Thomas hadn't meant to use Hargrove's rank, hadn't intended to invoke military authority in a civilian confrontation. But fear had overtaken caution. "Sir, I don't know who this colonel is, but he has no jurisdiction here," Mills said, his voice colder now. "Control your dog or I will." Thomas's hand clutched at his chest pocket, feeling for his military ID, the one with the special chip Hargrove had mentioned. Was it true? Would saying the right words really summon help? It seemed impossible, yet Thomas had run out of options. "William," he said clearly, deliberately. "Code Delta." "Bennett, Thomas E. Service number 478923157. It was a desperate gamble, Thomas had no idea if the code would work, if it had ever been real or just Hargrove's way of giving a broken soldier some peace of mind. Officer Mills's patience snapped like a brittle twig. "Control your dog or I will," he barked, his voice edged with panic. Thomas tightened his grip on Max's harness. "He's doing his job," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Please don't." But the officer had already reached for his taser. Officer Jason Mills had never intended to become a police officer. His dream, the one he'd nurtured since childhood, had been to join the elite ranks of the United States Marine Corps. His father had been a Marine, his grandfather before him. The Mills men served. It was tradition. It was expected. But tradition shattered against reality when the military medical examiner discovered Jason's previously undiagnosed heart arrhythmia. Disqualified. A single word that had rewritten his entire future. "Police work is honorable too," his father had said, not quite meeting his eyes. The unspoken message hung between them, but it's not the Marines. Now, 3 years into his career with the Oak Ridge Police Department, Jason still carried that rejection like a stone in his chest. Each time he encountered military personnel, with their easy confidence and unspoken brotherhood, the stone grew heavier. This blind veteran with his imposing German shepherd had triggered something primal in Jason, the way the man carried himself despite his disability, the quiet authority in his voice. Even blind, Thomas Bennett exuded more natural command than Jason had managed to develop in his entire career. And now Bennett was dropping a colonel's name, as if military rank still held sway on these civilian streets, as if Jason's authority meant nothing in the face of this military connection. "Control your dog," Jason repeated, his finger hovering over the taser trigger. The German shepherd's unblinking stare unnerved him. Those intelligent eyes seemed to see right through him, judging him, finding him wanting. Officer Diane Rodriguez tried once more to de-escalate. "Mills, stand down. Let's verify his ID first." But Jason couldn't back down now, not with a growing crowd of onlookers, not with smartphones recording his every move. Not with this blind veteran somehow making him feel like the vulnerable one. "Last warning," he said, raising the taser. In that frozen instant, time seemed to stutter. Jason heard the distinct click as the safety disengaged, the faint electric whine charging the weapon. Something flickered across Bennett's face, a spasm of fear quickly mastered. "No!" Bennett shouted, but the crackle of voltage drowned him out. The taser fired with a sharp pop. The German shepherd yelped, his body seizing violently as the electrode struck. Bennett felt the harness jerk in his hand and then go limp. A split second later, another burst of electricity struck him square in the chest. Pain flared white-hot behind his sightless eyes, and his cane clattered to the pavement as he crumpled beside his dog. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. Phones were lifted higher, recording everything. Jason stood frozen, taser still extended, watching in horror as the blind veteran convulsed on the sidewalk. This wasn't supposed to happen. The dog was supposed to back down. The man was supposed to comply. Everything had spiraled beyond his control in seconds. "What the hell, Mills?" Rodriguez shoved past him, kneeling beside the fallen man. "Call an ambulance! Now!" Bennett lay on his side, the asphalt searing against his cheek. He could taste blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Groping blindly, he searched for Max, finally finding the dog's warm flank. He pressed his hand there, feeling the weak flutter of life. "Help him," he rasped, voice barely audible. "Please help my dog." The crowd's murmurs transformed into outright condemnation. "You tased a blind man," someone shouted, "and his service dog. What's wrong with you?" Another voice joined in. "I got it all on video. This is going viral." Jason felt sweat trickling down his spine. The weight of what he'd done began to settle on his shoulders. In trying to assert his authority, he'd committed the most egregious abuse of power imaginable. The optics couldn't be worse. A uniformed officer using a weapon against a disabled veteran and his service animal. His career flashed before his eyes. Not just discipline, this was potentially criminal. The realization made his knees weak. Officer Rodriguez was shouting into her radio, "I need EMTs at Main and Oak immediately. Officer-involved incident with a disabled civilian and service animal." A gray-haired man pushed through the gathering crowd. "I'm a retired combat medic," he announced, kneeling beside Bennett. "Son, can you hear me?" Bennett nodded weakly, still clutching Max's fur. "My dog," he whispered. "He's trained for military operations. Special program. Needs a vet who understands working dogs." The retired medic nodded, checking Bennett's pulse before turning his attention to the German Shepherd. "Respiratory rate is elevated but steady. No signs of cardiac distress in either of them. Good news is the taser didn't hit any vital areas." Jason took a step back, then another. His training had never covered this scenario. Nothing had prepared him for the consequences of his actions playing out in real time, with dozens of witnesses and an injured war hero at his feet. An older woman in the crowd pointed at him accusingly. "My husband was a Vietnam vet. Came home with a Purple Heart and PTSD. Is this how we thank our servicemen now, by attacking them on the streets they fought to protect?" "Someone call the Veterans Crisis Hotline," another voice shouted. "Already did," a man replied, phone pressed to his ear. "They're sending someone. And I called the local news." Jason felt Rodriguez's hand clamp around his arm. "Step back," she hissed. "You've done enough damage. Wait in the cruiser." "I was following protocol for aggressive animals," he protested weakly. "That dog wasn't aggressive until you threatened its handler," Rodriguez snapped. "Now get in the car before I have to arrest you too." As Jason retreated toward the patrol car, the crowd parted like water around a stone. Faces hostile. Someone spat on the ground near his feet. Another person booed openly. Inside the cruiser, Jason watched through the windshield as paramedics arrived, carefully examining Bennett and his dog. The blind veteran refused to be separated from the animal, insisting they be transported together. "Call Colonel William Hargrove," Jason heard Bennett tell the paramedics, his voice stronger now. "Special Veterans Affairs Division. He'll authorize joint transport." The name again. This mysterious colonel, who Bennett seemed convinced would solve everything. Jason's radio crackled with chatter, dispatch calling for his supervisor, requesting a lieutenant at the scene, mentioning possible press involvement. My career is over, Jason thought numbly. 3 years of academy training and field work destroyed in less than 5 minutes of poor judgment. He watched Bennett sit up with assistance, one hand never leaving his dog's fur. The German Shepherd had recovered enough to lift his head, brown eyes somehow finding his master's face despite the chaos around them. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the pavement, a silent reassurance that tightened something in Jason's chest. That was loyalty. That was the bond that Jason had failed to understand when he saw them walking down the street. Not a blind man and an aggressive dog, but a team forged in circumstances he couldn't imagine. The realization came too late. Jason rested his forehead against the steering wheel, listening to the radio chatter grow increasingly urgent. His supervisor was 2 minutes out. Internal Affairs would be notified. The department's public affairs office was already fielding calls. He lifted his head when a strange sound cut through the chaos, a deep mechanical rumble approaching from the east. Not ambulances, not police cruisers, something heavier, more purposeful. Through the windshield, Jason saw them first. 3 massive military Humvees turning onto Main Street, moving in perfect formation. Behind them, 2 black SUVs with government plates. The convoy rolled down the center of the road, ignoring traffic signals, forcing civilian vehicles to the curbs. People on the sidewalks stopped to stare. Phones that had been recording Bennett and Max swiveled to capture this new development. The military vehicles pulled to a stop in a precise semicircle around the scene, effectively blocking all traffic. Jason watched in disbelief as uniformed soldiers exited the vehicles with practiced efficiency. They weren't National Guard. These were active-duty military, armed and moving with purpose. In seconds, they had established a perimeter around Bennett and Max. From the lead SUV emerged a tall figure, a man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. The crowd parted before him without being asked. Even from inside the cruiser, Jason could see the impressive array of ribbons and medals adorning the man's dress uniform. The silver-haired officer knelt beside Bennett, speaking words Jason couldn't hear. Bennett nodded, his face showing visible relief. The officer then stood, surveying the scene with cold calculation before his gaze settled directly on the police cruiser. On Jason, the officer strode toward the vehicle with measured steps. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes, even at a distance, burned with controlled fury. Jason realized with sudden clarity who this must be. The mysterious Colonel William Hargrove had arrived exactly as Bennett had predicted, and somehow, impossibly, he had arrived just 7 minutes after Bennett had called his name. The colonel stopped beside the cruiser and gestured for Jason to lower his window. With trembling fingers, Jason complied. "Officer Mills," the colonel said, not a question but a statement. His voice was quiet, precise, and more terrifying than if he'd shouted, "Do you understand what you've done today?" Jason swallowed hard. "Sir, I was responding to a report of suspicious activity. The dog showed signs of aggression and—" "That dog," Colonel Hargrove interrupted, "is Sergeant Max, recipient of the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Gallantry. He took a Taliban sniper's bullet meant for his handler and continued to perform his duties while bleeding out. That suspicious individual you assaulted is Sergeant Thomas Bennett, who lost his sight, saving his entire unit from an ambush." Each word fell like a hammer blow. Jason couldn't maintain eye contact with the colonel, his gaze dropping to his own hands still shaking in his lap. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Ignorance isn't a defense, son. It's an indictment." The colonel's voice remained steady, making his words all the more devastating. "You saw a disabled veteran and his service animal, and you chose to see a threat. That choice reveals something about you, not them." Jason had no response. What could he possibly say to justify what he'd done? "Do you know why I'm here, Officer Mills?" the colonel continued. Jason shook his head. "Because when Sergeant Bennett came home, broken in body but not in spirit, I made him a promise. I promised that he would never be forgotten, never be abandoned by the country he sacrificed everything to protect." The colonel leaned closer, his voice dropping so only Jason could hear. "I also promised that if anyone harmed him or his dog, they would answer directly to me. Today, that's you." With that, Colonel Hargrove straightened and turned away, returning to where medics were now preparing to move Bennett and Max to one of the military vehicles. The crowd had grown, people capturing every moment on their phones. News vans were arriving at the edges of the military perimeter. Jason watched through the window as the story of his greatest failure unfolded before a growing audience. And he finally understood what Bennett had been trying to tell him from the beginning, that some bonds transcend ordinary understanding, and some heroes continue to serve long after they leave the battlefield. In that frozen instant, time seemed to stutter. Thomas heard the distinct click as the safety was disengaged, the faint electric whine charging the weapon. "No!" he shouted, but the crackle of voltage drowned him out. The taser fired with a sharp pop. Max yelped, his body seizing violently as the electrodes struck. Thomas felt the harness jerk in his hand and then go limp. A split second later, another burst of electricity struck him square in the chest. Pain flared white-hot behind his sightless eyes, and his cane clattered to the pavement as he crumpled beside his dog. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. Phones were lifted, recording everything. Thomas lay on his side, the asphalt searing against his cheek. He could taste blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Groping blindly, he searched for Max, finally finding the dog's warm flank. He pressed his hand there, feeling the weak flutter of life. "Help him!" he rasped, voice barely audible. "Please help my dog." But the officers were already calling for backup, their boots pounding around him. In that moment, it felt like the whole world had turned against them both. A chorus of voices erupted around them. People shouted for the officers to stop, some crying openly as they watched the blind veteran and his service dog lying motionless. "You can't do that," a woman yelled, her phone raised high. "He's disabled. He's a veteran." Thomas felt hands trying to roll him over. He flinched, his whole body trembling from the aftershocks of the taser. "My dog. He needs help," he gasped, each word scraping his throat raw. Max lay stretched on his side, chest heaving shallowly. His brown eyes fluttered open for a moment, searching for Thomas's face before closing again. An older man pushed through the growing crowd. "Someone call the Veterans Crisis Hotline," he barked. "This is an outrage." Over the radios, an officer's voice crackled, tense and uncertain. "Requesting additional units. Situation escalating. Civilians interfering." More sirens wailed in the distance. It was chaos now. Dozens of witnesses recording every second. Thomas's hand finally found Max's collar. He clung to it like a lifeline, his vision swimming in darkness. "Stay with me," he whispered. All around them, the outrage built into something unstoppable. An entire street demanding that someone do the right thing. The pain from the taser subsided into a dull ache, but Thomas's fear for Max remained sharp as a blade. He could feel the dog's breathing, too rapid, too shallow. Something was wrong. Max had taken the brunt of the electrical charge, his wet nose and mouth providing less resistance than human skin. "He needs a vet," Thomas managed to say, louder this time. "Please, he's not just a dog. He's a decorated service animal." Someone knelt beside him, a woman judging by the lightness of her step and the faint scent of vanilla lotion. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Try not to move. Paramedics are on their way." "Check my dog first," Thomas insisted, his fingers still tangled in Max's fur. "Please." He felt the nurse shift position, heard her gentle murmurs as she examined Max. "His pulse is strong," she reported after a moment. "Respiration is evening out. I think he's mainly stunned, but he should see a veterinarian to be safe." Relief washed through Thomas, momentarily overshadowing his own discomfort. "Thank you," he whispered. The nurse's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. "The officer who did this is being contained by his partner. There are at least 30 people filming right now. This won't go unpunished." Small comfort, Thomas thought bitterly. No punishment would erase what had happened. No disciplinary action would heal the trauma inflicted on Max, who had done nothing but fulfill his training. As his head cleared, Thomas became aware of the growing crowd surrounding them. The murmur of voices swelled like an approaching tide, angry, indignant, demanding justice. In his darkness, Thomas couldn't see their faces, but he could feel their presence, their energy focused on him and Max like a physical force. "Back up, please." A new voice, authoritative, male. "Give them air. Paramedics coming through." The crowd reluctantly parted. Thomas heard the distinctive sound of an emergency medical kit being unzipped, felt professional hands checking his pulse, his pupils, the entry point where the taser barbs had struck. "Sir, I'm going to remove these barbs. It might sting a bit. Thomas nodded, gritting his teeth as the paramedic worked. His thoughts remained fixed on Max. My dog. Animal Control is sending their emergency vet, the paramedic assured him. They've been advised it's a service animal with military training. Don't separate us, Thomas said firmly, panic rising at the thought. He'll be disoriented when he fully recovers. He needs to know I'm safe. We'll keep you together, the paramedic promised. Can you tell me your name? Thomas Bennett. Sergeant, retired. My ID is in my left breast pocket. As the paramedic retrieved his identification, Thomas heard a commotion at the edge of the crowd. The female officer, Rodriguez he recalled, was speaking urgently into her radio. Dispatch, be advised we have military vehicles approaching the scene. Repeat, military vehicles entering the area without prior coordination. Thomas's heart leapt. Could it be? Had his desperate invocation of Colonel Hargrove's name actually triggered something? The deep rumble of heavy engines confirmed it wasn't his imagination. The crowd's attention shifted, voices rising in surprise and confusion. Thomas strained to hear, piecing together the scene from fragments of sound. Diesel engines, the distinctive squeak of military-grade brakes, boots hitting pavement in unison. Max stirred beside him, perhaps responding to the change in Thomas's breathing. The dog whined softly, his body tensing as he tried to rise. Easy, boy, Thomas soothed, running his hand along Max's side. It's okay. Help is here. William came through for us. The dog relaxed slightly at the sound of Thomas's voice, but remained alert, his muscles quivering with the effort to regain control of his body. The crowd fell oddly silent, then erupted in a new wave of murmurs. Thomas heard the measured tread of boots approaching, not the casual gait of local police, but the disciplined march of soldiers. Sergeant Bennett, a familiar voice, deep and commanding. Thomas turned his face toward the sound, relief flooding through him. Colonel Hargrove, a strong hand clasped his shoulder. Looks like you and Max found trouble. Wasn't looking for it, sir. Never are. The colonel's voice remained steady, but Thomas could hear the controlled fury beneath. My medic is going to check you both. We have transport standing by. Thomas felt another presence kneel beside Max, gentle hands examining the dog with practiced efficiency. Good news, Sergeant, a new voice reported. Pulse and respiration normal. Pupils responsive. No signs of cardiac distress. He's one tough dog. Always has been, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. He felt Max's muzzle nudge against his hand, weak but deliberate, the dog's way of reassuring him that he was recovering. Around them, the scene was transforming. Thomas could sense the shift in the crowd's energy, hear the change in the local officers' radio communications. Colonel Hargrove's presence had altered the dynamic completely. Sir, this is a local police matter. The voice belonged to Officer Mills, the one who had tased them. His tone attempted authority but wavered with uncertainty. Not anymore. Colonel Hargrove's response was glacial. This man and his dog are under federal protection as part of the Veterans Enhanced Protection Program. I've never heard of... You wouldn't have. Hargrove cut him off. The program is classified. What matters is that you assaulted a disabled veteran and a specially trained military asset without provocation. The consequences will be significant. Thomas heard the rustle of paper, documents being presented. The stunned silence from the local officers told him that whatever Hargrove had produced carried substantial weight. My men will take it from here, Hargrove continued. Sergeant Bennett and Max will be transported to our medical facility. Colonel, Thomas interjected, the civilians who helped us, the nurse and the older gentleman who called for help, they should be acknowledged. He sensed Hargrove's approval in the brief pause before he responded. Always thinking of others. That's why you made sergeant. Hargrove raised his voice to address the crowd. On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, I want to thank those civilians who intervened to assist Sergeant Bennett and his service dog. Your actions represent the best of American citizenship. If those individuals would identify themselves to my staff, we'd like to express our gratitude formally. A ripple of movement in the crowd. Thomas heard several people step forward, including the nurse who had first examined Max. Now, let's get you and Max proper medical attention. Hargrove's hand returned to Thomas's shoulder. Can you stand? Thomas nodded, though uncertainty flashed through him. The taser's effects lingered in his muscles, making them unreliable. I'll need help, he admitted reluctantly. That's what we're here for. Two soldiers carefully helped Thomas to his feet, supporting him as his legs threatened to buckle. Max whined anxiously, trying to rise and follow despite his own weakness. Easy, Max, Thomas called, hearing the dog's distress. I'm right here. We're going together. The military medic spoke softly to Max, helping the dog stand on unsteady legs. Remarkable animal, the medic commented. Most would still be completely incapacitated. He's not most dogs, Thomas replied, a hint of pride cutting through his exhaustion. As they began moving toward the waiting vehicles, Thomas became aware of a new sound rising from the crowd, applause. Hesitant at first, then building in strength and conviction. People were clapping, cheering even, as Thomas and Max were escorted to safety. The sound washed over Thomas like a healing balm. After months of anonymity in Oak Ridge, being the blind veteran that people acknowledged with awkward politeness but rarely engaged with, he was suddenly visible, not as an object of pity, but as someone worthy of respect and protection. Your sister has been notified, Hargrove said quietly as they approached the transport. She'll meet us at the medical center. Thomas nodded gratefully. Sarah would be frantic with worry once she heard what had happened. Having her waiting would make the aftermath easier to bear. And Max will be treated by our veterinary specialist, Hargrove continued. The same one who handled his rehabilitation after Afghanistan. Relief flooded through Thomas. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Hargrove replied, his voice hardening. This incident will have repercussions. Once you're both stabilized, we'll need your statement. The footage from civilians is already circulating online. It's going to cause a stir. Thomas hadn't considered that aspect, the public nature of their ordeal. The thought of becoming a symbol, a case study in police interaction with disabled veterans, made his stomach clench. I just want to ensure Max is okay, he said wearily. The rest can wait. Of course, Hargrove agreed. But you should know that your experience today may help prevent similar incidents for others. Sometimes our greatest service comes when we least expect it. As they reached the transport vehicle, Thomas heard Max's claws clicking on the metal ramp. Despite his ordeal, the dog was walking on his own, determined to maintain his dignity and purpose. Thomas smiled, finding strength in his companion's resilience. Together, they had survived war. Together, they had navigated the darkness of his blindness. They would survive this too. And perhaps, as Hargrove suggested, transform their suffering into something meaningful. As the heavy doors closed behind them, sealing out the chaos of the street, Thomas reached for Max's familiar presence. The dog pressed against his leg, their bond unbroken despite the morning's trauma. Good boy, Thomas whispered, running his fingers through Max's thick fur. The best boy. Max's tail thumped weakly against the floor of the vehicle, a sound that to Thomas meant everything would eventually be all right. Thomas drifted in and out of awareness as the military vehicle carried them smoothly through the streets of Oak Ridge. The familiar weight of Max pressed against his leg anchored him to reality, keeping the worst of the flashbacks at bay. Still, memories intruded. Fragments of that terrible day in Afghanistan when darkness became his permanent companion. He remembered the explosion, the pressure wave lifting him off his feet. The moment of suspended animation before gravity reclaimed him, the searing pain followed by a silence so complete he thought he'd gone deaf as well as blind. Then Max's warm tongue on his face, the dog somehow finding him amidst the chaos, refusing to leave even as the medevac arrived. "How you holding up, Sergeant?" Colonel Hargrove's voice pulled Thomas back to the present. "I've had better mornings, sir," Thomas replied, attempting a weak smile. "But I've had worse, too. That's the spirit." A pause, then, "We're 5 minutes out from the medical center. Your sister called twice while you were resting. She's waiting for us." Thomas nodded, gratitude washing through him. Sarah had been his rock since his return stateside. She'd moved to Oak Ridge when Thomas was discharged, rearranging her entire life to be near him during those first critical months of adjustment. Even after he'd insisted on living independently, a battle that had taken weeks of stubborn argument, she'd remained close, just a 10-minute drive away. "She's going to be furious," Thomas murmured, more to himself than to Hargrove. "Already is," the colonel confirmed. "Took 3 of my staff to convince her not to drive to the scene herself." Despite everything, Thomas chuckled. Sarah's protective instincts were legendary in the Bennett family. 5'4" of pure determination, she'd once faced down a drill sergeant who'd made Thomas run extra laps during a family day visit to boot camp. The sergeant had backed down. Max stirred against Thomas's leg, a soft whine escaping him. Thomas immediately focused his attention on the dog, running his hands carefully over Max's body, searching for signs of distress. "What's wrong, boy? Are you hurting?" The military medic moved closer. "His vitals are still good, but he might be experiencing some muscle cramping. It's common after taser exposure. The good news is there's no sign of cardiac arrhythmia or respiratory distress." Thomas felt a wave of guilt. Max had taken the first taser strike, the one meant to subdue a supposedly aggressive animal. If Thomas had somehow diffused the situation earlier, if he'd been more diplomatic with Officer Mills— "Stop that!" Hargrove said sharply, seeming to read Thomas's thoughts. "This wasn't your fault." Mills escalated a non-situation because of his own issues. "What issues?" Thomas asked, momentarily distracted from his guilt. Hargrove sighed. "We did a quick background check while en route to you. Jason Mills applied to the Marine Corps 3 years ago, was rejected on medical grounds, heart condition, became a police officer 6 months later." The pieces clicked into place. Mills's hostility, his insistence on asserting authority, his reaction to Thomas mentioning Hargrove's military rank. It painted a picture of a man carrying deep resentment toward those who had succeeded where he had failed. "That doesn't excuse what he did," Thomas said firmly. "No, it doesn't," Hargrove agreed. "But understanding the why might help you process this. Mills will face consequences, serious ones. But he's also a product of inadequate training and his own unresolved issues." The vehicle slowed, then came to a stop. Thomas heard the hydraulic hiss of the door opening, felt the subtle change in air pressure as the outside world intruded on their protected space. "We're here," Hargrove announced. "Ready?" Thomas took a deep breath, centering himself. "Ready." 2 soldiers helped him stand. But to Thomas's surprise, Max pushed himself up as well, positioning himself in the familiar guiding stance despite his ordeal. The dog's determination brought a lump to Thomas's throat. "Sir," he said, turning toward where he knew Hargrove stood, "I'd like to try walking with Max if the medic thinks he's able." A moment of silence, Hargrove likely conferring silently with the medic. "We'll stay close," Hargrove finally said. "At the first sign of either of you faltering, we step in. Deal?" "Deal." Thomas felt for Max's harness, finding comfort in the familiar leather. "Ready to work, Max?" The dog's muscles tensed beneath Thomas's hand, not with fear, but with purpose. A soft woof confirmed what Thomas already knew. Max was a soldier at heart, committed to his duty regardless of personal discomfort. Together they descended the ramp, moving slower than usual, but with quiet dignity. Thomas could hear the bustle of the medical center around them, not the civilian hospital he'd expected, but a military medical facility he hadn't known existed in Oak Ridge. "Thomas!" Sarah's voice cut through the background noise. He turned toward the sound, a smile automatically forming despite everything. Quick footsteps approached, and then his sister's arms were around him, her familiar scent of lavender and coffee enveloping him. Thomas hugged her back, careful not to lose his balance. "I'm okay," he said before she could ask. "We both are." Sarah pulled back, and Thomas could picture her expression perfectly. Eyebrows drawn together, mouth set in a determined line, eyes rapidly assessing for any sign of injury she could fight on his behalf. "You were tased," she said flatly. "That's not okay by any definition." "Could have been worse. Don't you dare minimize this." Her voice caught slightly. "When Colonel Hargrove called me—" "God, Thomas, I thought—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Thomas knew what she'd thought. That he'd become another statistic, another disabled veteran who had a fatal misunderstanding with law enforcement. It happened too often, those tragic intersections of trauma, disability, and split-second decisions by undertrained officers. "I'm here," he said softly. "Max protected me, like always." At the mention of his name, Max pressed closer to Thomas's leg. Sarah knelt down, and Thomas heard her murmuring to the dog, felt Max's tail wag weakly in response. "He's hurt worse than you're letting on," Sarah accused, standing back up. Before Thomas could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "Mrs. Cartwright? I'm Dr. Evan Phillips, Chief Veterinarian for the Working Dog Program. May I examine Max?" "Of course," Thomas said, loosening his grip on Max's harness. To the dog, he added, "It's okay, buddy. Let the doctor check you." Max reluctantly allowed himself to be led a few steps away. Thomas listened intently as the veterinarian conducted his examination, cataloging every sound, every murmured observation. "Remarkable resilience," Dr. Phillips finally announced. "Elevated heart rate, but within acceptable parameters. Some muscle tremors, particularly in the hindquarters where the taser made contact. No signs of burns or permanent nerve damage. I'd like to run some blood work to check for stress markers, but overall, he's in surprisingly good condition." Relief flooded through Thomas. "When can he return to duty?" "Thomas," Sarah protested, "he needs rest, not work." "Max isn't just my guide, Sarah. He's my partner. Being on duty is what centers him." "What centers both of us?" Thomas turned back toward the veterinarian. "Doctor, I'd recommend 24 hours of observation and rest," Phillips replied. "Fluids, anti-inflammatories, and a muscle relaxant for the tremors. After that, light duty for 3 days, then reassess. But knowing Max's history, I suspect he'll recover more quickly than the average dog." "He always has," Thomas agreed, pride evident in his voice. A nurse approached next, gently guiding Thomas to an examination room where his own condition could be assessed. The separation from Max, even knowing the dog was receiving the best care, sent a spike of anxiety through him. Since Afghanistan, they had rarely been apart. The medical examination was thorough but mercifully brief. As the doctor had predicted, Thomas had fared better than Max. The taser barbs had penetrated his clothing but barely broken his skin. His heart rhythm showed no abnormalities, and the residual muscle weakness was already improving. "You're lucky," the doctor concluded. The second taser shot was poorly aimed, likely because the officer was rattled after hitting your dog. Had both barbs made proper contact, we'd be having a different conversation. Thomas nodded, absorbing this information. "When can I see Max again?" "He's being settled in the recovery ward now. Once we finish your discharge paperwork, you can join him." True to the doctor's word, Thomas was reunited with Max within the hour. The dog was resting on a padded bed in a quiet room, an IV line delivering fluids and medication. At Thomas's entrance, Max immediately raised his head, a soft whine of recognition escaping him. "Hey, boy," Thomas said, carefully making his way to the bed. His hand found Max's head, fingers gently scratching behind the ears in the way he knew Max loved. "We made it through another one, didn't we?" The dog sighed, leaning into Thomas's touch. A chair had been placed beside the bed, and Thomas sank into it gratefully, the events of the morning finally catching up with him in a wave of exhaustion. Sarah entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Lily's been asking about you both," she said, referring to her 8-year-old daughter. "I told her Uncle Thomas and Max had an accident, but they're going to be okay." Thomas smiled at the mention of his niece. Lily adored Max, and the feeling was mutual. The normally disciplined service dog transformed into a playful companion during his off-duty time with the little girl. "Tell her we'll have extra stories for her next visit," Thomas replied, "once Max is back on his feet." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. She made a get-well card for Max, drew a picture of him wearing a superhero cape. "Accurate," Thomas said softly. They sat in companionable silence, the rhythmic beeping of Max's monitoring equipment creating a soothing background. Thomas found himself drifting, the stress and adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep weariness. He was almost asleep when Colonel Hargrove entered. The sound of the officer's distinctive stride brought Thomas back to alertness. "Sorry to disturb you," Hargrove said, "but there are some developments you should know about." Thomas straightened in his chair. "Go ahead, sir." "The videos are everywhere. All major news networks, social media. Blind veteran and service dog tased by police is trending nationwide. The department is facing intense scrutiny, and Officer Mills has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Thomas sighed. Becoming the center of a media firestorm was the last thing he wanted. "And Max? How is he being portrayed?" Hargrove's voice softened slightly. "As the hero he is. Several of the videos clearly show him trying to protect you even after being tased." "The public response has been significant." "Meaning?" "Meaning there are already calls for legislation to better protect service animals and their handlers. Senator Markham's office reached out an hour ago. They're drafting a bill. They want to call it the Max Act." Thomas's hand stilled on Max's fur. The dog nudged him gently as if sensing his surprise. "I didn't want any of this," Thomas said quietly. "Few heroes do," Hargrove replied. "But sometimes our hardest moments serve a greater purpose." Thomas thought of Afghanistan, of the darkness that had become his world, of the countless adjustments, frustrations, and small victories that had followed. Of Max, steadfast through it all. Perhaps Hargrove was right. Perhaps this ordeal, painful as it was, might prevent others from suffering the same fate. The thought brought a measure of peace amidst the turmoil of the day. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "You both rest," Hargrove said firmly. "Everything else can wait until tomorrow." As if on cue, Max sighed deeply and shifted position, his body relaxing into sleep now that Thomas was near. Sarah murmured something about getting coffee and slipped from the room, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and his faithful companion. In the quiet of the recovery room, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the dusty streets of Afghanistan to the sidewalks of Oak Ridge, Virginia, from sighted to blind, from soldier to veteran, through it all, Max had been his constant, his eyes, his protector, his friend. "Rest well, buddy," Thomas whispered, his hand resting lightly on Max's flank. "We've got more roads to travel together." The dog's tail thumped once against the bed. Acknowledgement, agreement, promise. Outside the room, the world continued to react to their story, But in this moment, nothing existed beyond the bond between a man and the dog who had become his lifeline in a darkened world. 3 days after the incident, Thomas sat in Colonel Hargrove's temporary office at the military medical facility, Max resting at his feet. The dog's recovery had been remarkable, ahead of schedule, as Dr. Phillips had predicted. Thomas could feel the difference in Max's movements, the return of fluid strength when they walked together, the alert posture that signaled his readiness to work. "The footage has been viewed over 20 million times," Hargrove said, his voice neutral as he updated Thomas on the situation. "Every major news outlet has covered the story. The Oak Ridge Police Department has issued a formal apology, and the mayor has requested a meeting with you when you feel up to it." Thomas nodded, absently running his fingers through Max's fur. The media attention was uncomfortable but not unexpected. In the age of smartphones and social media, no injustice went undocumented for long. "And Officer Mills?" Thomas asked. "Administrative leave pending investigation, though the outcome seems clear. The department is also implementing mandatory training on interaction with service animals and disabled civilians." Hargrove paused. "He's requested to speak with you if you're willing." That surprised Thomas. Why would he want to talk to me? Redemption, perhaps, or closure? It's entirely your choice whether to grant the meeting. Thomas considered the offer. His initial instinct was refusal. The memory of Max convulsing under the taser's current was still too raw. But beneath his anger lay a deeper understanding. Mistakes, even terrible ones, shouldn't define a person's entire existence. Hadn't his military career taught him that lesson repeatedly? "I'll think about it," he finally said. "Fair enough." Papers rustled as Hargrove shifted topics. "Now, about the Max Act that Senator Markham is proposing, they'd like your input on the legislation." Thomas sighed. "I'm not a politician, sir." "No, but you are the face of this issue now, whether you wanted to be or not. Your experience, and Max's, could help shape protections for thousands of service animals and their handlers." The weight of responsibility settled on Thomas's shoulders. He'd never sought the spotlight, had always been content to serve quietly. But Hargrove was right. Sometimes duty called in unexpected ways. What would it involve? Initially, a statement of support. Eventually, testimony before the committee when the bill reaches that stage. The senator's office would handle the details. Hargrove's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "This could be your new mission, Thomas. A different kind of service." Max shifted at Thomas's feet, pressing his weight reassuringly against his leg. The gesture wasn't coincidental. The dog sensed his handler's tension and responded instinctively with comfort. "I'll do it," Thomas decided. "For Max and for others like us." "Good man." Approval warmed Hargrove's voice. "Now, there's one more thing we need to discuss. Your military ID." Thomas's hand moved automatically to his chest pocket, where the ID usually resided. It wasn't there. The doctors had removed it along with his clothing when he was admitted. "What about it?" "The tracking chip worked exactly as designed," Hargrove explained. "When you used the code phrase and my name, it activated an emergency protocol. Our response team was mobilized immediately." Thomas had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of gratitude through him. "I wasn't sure it was real," he admitted. "Thought it might just be something you told me to provide peace of mind." "Very real," Hargrove assured him. "Part of a pilot program for high-risk veterans, those with significant disabilities or ongoing security concerns. You were one of the first participants. And now everyone knows about it," Thomas said, understanding the implications. "The security protocol has been compromised." "Yes and no. The public knows something happened, but not the specifics. Most assume it was simply military looking out for one of their own. Still, we're upgrading the system. You'll be issued a new ID with enhanced features." Thomas nodded, relieved. The knowledge that help was truly just minutes away had become an important part of his sense of security. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah's voice called through, "Thomas? Lily's here to see Max. Is now a good time?" Thomas smiled, his mood immediately lightening. "Perfect timing. Send her in." The door opened and Thomas heard the excited footsteps of his niece rushing into the room. Max's tail immediately began thumping against the floor. The dog adored Lily almost as much as he loved Thomas. "Uncle Thomas." "Max!" Lily's voice bubbled with excitement. "Mom said I could visit if I promised to be super gentle." "He's feeling much better today," Thomas assured her, holding out his arm to guide her into a hug. "I bet he'd love to see that get-well card you made him." "I brought it." Paper rustled as Lily presumably held up her artwork. "It has Max wearing a cape because he's a hero dog. And I drew you too, Uncle Thomas. You're both wearing matching capes." Thomas laughed, genuinely delighted by his niece's imagination. "That sounds amazing. Why don't you describe it to me?" As Lily launched into a detailed explanation of her artwork, Thomas heard Colonel Hargrove quietly excuse himself, giving the family their private moment. Max had shifted position to sit beside Lily, allowing the little girl to gently pet his head while she chattered away. "And then I put a rainbow behind you both because Mrs. Johnson at school says rainbows come after storms. And Mom said you and Max went through a storm, but now everything's getting better." Thomas swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. "Out of the mouths of babes," as the saying went. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. The storm is passing." "Does Max still have owies?" Lily asked, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "Just a little sore," Thomas explained, "like when you fall on the playground. But he's getting stronger every day." "I brought him something else too," Lily announced. "Mom said it was okay." She rustled through what Thomas assumed was a backpack. "It's his favorite treat, those special peanut butter biscuits from Mr. Peterson's bakery." Thomas heard Max's tail thumping faster against the floor. The dog's sense of smell had undoubtedly already identified the treats. "May I give him one, please?" "Just one," Thomas agreed, "and make him do a trick first. He needs to practice his skills." Lily giggled. "Max, can you shake hands?" Thomas felt Max shift position, raising his paw to meet Lily's hand in a well-practiced gesture. The little girl's delighted laughter was the most healing sound Thomas had heard in days. "Good boy," Lily praised, followed by the distinctive crunch of Max enjoying his reward. "Uncle Thomas, when can Max come home? Mom said you're both staying at the special hospital." "Tomorrow, if the doctors say it's okay," Thomas replied. "We're just here for observation now." "And then will you come to my school for show and tell? I told everyone about how brave Max was, and Ms. Johnson said maybe you could visit and teach us about service dogs." The request caught Thomas off guard. Before the incident, he'd kept a low profile in Oak Ridge, preferring privacy to public engagement, but perhaps that needed to change. If his experience could educate others, especially children who would grow up to be more understanding adults, wasn't that worth stepping outside his comfort zone? "I'd be honored," he told Lily. "We'll have to check with your teacher about the details, but Max and I would love to visit your class." Lily's squeal of excitement was so high-pitched that Max gave a startled woof. "Sorry, Max," she immediately apologized, lowering her voice. "I'm just really happy." The visit continued for another 20 minutes, with Lily sharing school news and neighborhood gossip with the unfiltered enthusiasm of an 8-year-old. Thomas found himself laughing more than he had in weeks, the simple joy of family temporarily overshadowing the trauma they'd experienced. When Sarah finally announced it was time to leave, Lily hugged both Thomas and Max with fierce affection. "Get better super fast," she instructed. "We miss you at home." After they departed, Thomas sat quietly with Max, reflecting on the unexpected turns his life had taken. From decorated soldier to blind veteran, from private citizen to reluctant public figure, each transition had required adjustment, resilience, and no small amount of grace. The door opened again, and Thomas recognized Colonel Hargrove's measured stride. "Good visit?" the officer inquired. "The best medicine," Thomas confirmed. "Lily wants us to speak at her school about service dogs." "And will you?" Thomas nodded. "I think it's time to be more visible. If what happened to us can prevent similar incidents by educating people, then we have a responsibility to share our story." "That's the Sergeant Bennett I remember," Hargrove said approvingly, "always thinking of the mission." "Speaking of which," Thomas said, making a sudden decision, "I'd like to meet with Officer Mills tomorrow before Max and I are discharged." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Max and I can't move forward if we're carrying anger, and maybe Mills needs this conversation as much as we do." Hargrove was silent for a moment. "I'll arrange it," he finally said. "Under proper supervision, of course." "Of course." Thomas smiled slightly. "I may be forgiving, but I'm not reckless." The following morning, Thomas sat in a conference room at the medical facility, Max at his side. The dog was alert but calm, his behavior impeccable as always when on duty. Thomas heard the door open, followed by hesitant footsteps. Not the confident stride of a police officer, but the uncertain gait of a man facing his mistakes. "Mr. Bennett," a voice said softly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Sergeant," Thomas corrected mildly. "Old habits." "Sergeant Bennett," Mills amended quickly. I don't know where to begin." "Sitting down might help," Thomas suggested, gesturing to the chair across from him. He heard the scrape of chair legs as Mills complied. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Thomas was in no hurry to break it. He had extended the opportunity for this meeting, but the burden of beginning the conversation properly belonged to Mills. "I'm sorry," Mills finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Those words are completely inadequate, but they're true. What I did was unforgivable." "Why did you do it?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. "Was it the dog, the uniform, or something else?" Mills exhaled shakily. "All of it. None of it. I don't know." A pause. "That's not true. I do know, and I owe you honesty." Thomas waited, giving the officer space to collect his thoughts. "I wanted to be a Marine," Mills continued. "Third generation. My father, my grandfather. It was all I ever dreamed about. When I was disqualified for a heart condition I didn't even know I had. Something broke inside me." Max shifted slightly, pressing against Thomas's leg. The dog was tracking Mills's emotional state, Thomas realized, alert to any potential threat but not yet concerned. "I became a police officer because it was the closest I could get to that sense of purpose, of brotherhood," Mills went on. "But it wasn't the same. And every time I encountered someone who'd succeeded where I'd failed, someone who wore the uniform I couldn't earn, that broken part of me ached." "So when you saw my military ID," Thomas began. "I reacted to what it represented, not to who you are," Mills finished. "It was unprofessional, inexcusable, and contrary to everything I should stand for as an officer of the law." Thomas nodded, absorbing the explanation. It aligned with what Hargrove had told him about Mills's background, but hearing it directly carried more weight. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "With your career?" Mills made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "Career's over. Best case scenario, I resign before they fire me. Worst case, criminal charges. Either way, I'll never wear a badge again." Thomas considered this. The consequences seemed appropriate, yet he felt no satisfaction in Mill's professional destruction. "And what will you do instead?" "I don't know," Mills admitted. "But I've been thinking about something. The department has no formal training on interacting with service animals or disabled civilians, nothing beyond a basic paragraph in the manual. That needs to change. It does, Thomas agreed. I've already spoken with my union rep. I want to help develop that training, not as an officer, but as someone who made every possible mistake. A cautionary example, I guess. Mills paused. It won't undo what I did to you and Max, but it might prevent someone else from making the same errors. Thomas was surprised by the proposal. He'd expected remorse, perhaps even self-pity, but not this constructive approach to redemption. That's actually a good idea, he said slowly. Have you spoken with Senator Markham's office? They're drafting legislation on service animal protections. Your perspective could be valuable. You'd vouch for me after what I did? I'm not vouching for your past actions, Thomas clarified. I'm acknowledging that your experience, properly channeled, could contribute to meaningful change. That's worth supporting. Mills was silent for a long moment. Thank you, he finally said, voice thick with emotion. I don't deserve your generosity. This isn't about what you deserve, Thomas replied. It's about what serves the greater good. He paused, then added, one question, though. Would you be willing to meet Max properly? On his terms? Yes, if he'll allow it. Thomas nodded, then issued a command. Max, friend. The German shepherd stood smoothly and moved around the table, approaching Mills with dignified caution. Thomas heard the officer's sharp intake of breath. He won't hurt you, Thomas assured him. Unless I command it, or you threaten me. Hold out your hand, palm down, and let him sniff you. Mills must have complied because Thomas heard Max's subtle inhalations as the dog processed the officer's scent. He's beautiful, Mills said softly. I never really looked at him before. I just saw a threat. That's the problem in a nutshell, Thomas observed. Looking without seeing. It's an irony that isn't lost on me. Max had apparently completed his assessment of Mills. Thomas heard the dog return to his side, resuming his position next to the chair. He's extraordinary, Mills said. The way he moves, how he watches you. I've never seen anything like it. He's one of a kind, Thomas agreed, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. And he's the reason I'm alive, in more ways than one. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, evolving from awkward apology to something approaching productive dialogue. By the time Mills departed, a tentative framework had been established, ways his experience could inform both the proposed legislation and departmental training protocols. Colonel Hargrove entered shortly after Mills left. That went better than expected, he observed. Thomas smiled wryly. Were you listening in, sir? Monitoring for your safety, Hargrove corrected. And I'm impressed with your approach. Not many would find a constructive path forward after what happened. War teaches you to focus on what matters, Thomas replied. Holding grudges accomplishes nothing. Finding ways to prevent future incidents honors what Max and I went through. Hargrove made a sound of agreement. The doctor has signed your discharge papers. You're clear to head home whenever you're ready. What about the media? Sarah mentioned they've been camped outside my house. We've arranged security for the next few days, and my team has prepared a statement you can release if you wish. No obligation to engage beyond that until you're ready. Thomas nodded, grateful for the colonel's foresight. Then I think we're ready to go home. Max has been patient, but I can tell he's eager to get back to our routine. As if understanding his words, Max stood and pressed his nose into Thomas's palm, their signal that the dog was ready to work. Let's go home, boy, Thomas said, rising to his feet. We've got a new mission to plan. 1 month after the incident, Thomas stood at the edge of Oak Ridge Community Park, Max in perfect position beside him. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of food trucks gathered for the occasion. Although Thomas couldn't see the crowd, he could sense its size from the gentle murmur of hundreds of conversations, the shuffle of feet on grass, the occasional bark of other service dogs who had come with their handlers. "Quite a turnout," Sarah murmured beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "At least 300 people, maybe more. Local news vans, too." Thomas nodded, adjusting his tie nervously. Public speaking had never been his forte, even before losing his sight. Now, knowing he would address a crowd he couldn't see, his mouth felt uncomfortably dry. "Uncle Thomas," Lily's voice cut through his anxiety as she bounded up to them. "Max looks so handsome in his new vest." Thomas smiled, reaching down to pat Max's head. The German Shepherd's new service vest had been a gift from Senator Markham's office, royal blue with gold trim, emblazoned with both his service animal certification and a special military working dog emblem that Colonel Hargrove had arranged. "He knows it too," Thomas replied. "Been strutting around all morning." "The mayor's ready whenever you are," Sarah informed him. "No rush, though." Thomas took a deep breath, centering himself. The past month had been a whirlwind of activity: meetings with legislators, interviews with carefully selected media outlets, consultation sessions with police departments interested in improving their training protocols. Through it all, Max had remained his steady companion, unfazed by cameras and microphones, always alert to Thomas's needs. "I'm ready," he decided, giving Max the command to guide him to the podium. They moved forward with practiced ease, navigating around chairs and people until they reached the small stage that had been erected for the ceremony. Max guided Thomas to the exact center of the platform, then settled into a perfect sitting position beside him. Mayor Elizabeth Foster greeted him warmly. "Sergeant Bennett, thank you for being here today. This means a great deal to our community." "Thank you for organizing it," Thomas replied, shaking her hand. The mayor turned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this special occasion. 1 month ago, our community witnessed an incident that none of us are proud of. But from that unfortunate event has come a wave of positive change, both here in Oak Ridge and across the nation." The crowd quieted as she continued. "Today, we gather not only to make amends, but to move forward together. The Max Act, named for the extraordinary service dog standing before you, has already passed committee and is expected to receive full Senate approval next week. This landmark legislation will strengthen protections for service animals and their handlers, establish nationwide training standards for law enforcement, and increase penalties for those who interfere with service animals performing their duties." Applause rippled through the crowd. Thomas felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for Max and for the unexpected good that had come from their ordeal. "Additionally," Mayor Foster continued, "our own Oak Ridge Police Department has instituted comprehensive new training protocols, becoming a model for departments across the country. And today, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Bennett Max Service Animal Training Scholarship, which will help pair trained service dogs with disabled veterans who need them." More applause, louder this time. Thomas hadn't known about the scholarship. It must have been kept as a surprise for the ceremony. The thought that other veterans would receive the same life-changing partnership he shared with Max moved him deeply. "Now, it is my honor to introduce Sergeant Thomas Bennett and his service dog, Max." Thomas stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on Max's harness for guidance. He could feel hundreds of eyes upon them both as he cleared his throat and began to speak. "Thank you, Mayor Foster, and thank you all for coming today. A wise person once told me that sometimes our hardest moments serve a greater purpose. 1 month ago, on a sidewalk not far from here, Max and I experienced one of those moments." Thomas paused, gathering his thoughts. "I won't dwell on the details. You've all seen the videos. Instead, I want to talk about what happened afterward, about how an entire community rallied around us, about how legislators from both parties came together to draft protections that should have existed long ago, about how even the officer involved has committed himself to ensuring the same mistakes aren't repeated. Max shifted slightly at Thomas's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture of solidarity that had become so familiar over their years together. But mostly, I want to talk about partnerships, about the bond between handler and service animal that goes beyond training, beyond duty, into something profound and life-changing. Max isn't just my eyes, he's my compass, my guardian, my constant companion through darkness, both literal and figurative. Thomas knelt down, bringing himself closer to Max's level. The dog immediately turned his head, his breath warm against Thomas's cheek. This legislation bearing his name isn't just about protecting service animals, though that's vitally important. It's about recognizing the sacred trust between humans and the animals who dedicate their lives to our well-being. It's about honoring a bond that transcends language, that operates on a level of intuition and loyalty that many of us struggle to achieve, even with other humans. Standing back up, Thomas continued, "I've been asked many times if I forgive what happened that day. The answer is complicated. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean that accountability isn't necessary. What it does mean is refusing to let anger define my path forward, or Max's." Thomas gestured to where he knew Officer Mills was sitting based on their pre-ceremony conversation. "Jason Mills made a terrible mistake. He's acknowledged that, accepted the consequences, and committed himself to ensuring others learn from his error. That's all any of us can do when we fail. Accept responsibility, make amends, and work to be better." A murmur ran through the crowd. Not everyone had expected Thomas to address Mills directly or with such measured compassion. The Max Act isn't about punishment. It's about education, awareness, and prevention. It's about making sure that handlers and their service animals can navigate public spaces safely, that law enforcement officers have the training they need to recognize and respect service animals, and that our communities understand the vital role these animals play in the lives of people with disabilities. Thomas paused, smiling slightly. "On a personal note, I'd like to thank a few people who have been instrumental in our recovery and in the positive changes that have emerged from this incident. My sister, Sarah Cartwright, who has been my rock since I lost my sight. My niece, Lily, who reminded me that rainbows come after storms. Colonel William Hargrove, who ensured Max received the best possible care. And every person who witnessed what happened that day and chose not to look away, who recorded, who spoke up, who demanded better from our systems and institutions." Max's tail thumped against the stage, once, twice, as if adding his own acknowledgments. "And finally," Thomas concluded, "I want to thank Max himself." He knelt again, wrapping his arms around the German Shepherd in an uncharacteristic public display of affection, "for never leaving my side, for guiding me through the darkest times, and for teaching me every day what true loyalty looks like." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Thomas felt Max's tail wagging harder against his leg, the dog seemingly aware that the recognition was for him. As the applause died down, Mayor Foster returned to the microphone. "Thank you, Sergeant Bennett, for those powerful words. And now, it is my privilege to present Max with the first ever Oak Ridge Medal of Valor, specially designed to be worn on his service vest." Thomas heard the mayor approach, felt her lean down to attach something to Max's vest. The medal reads, "For extraordinary courage and unwavering loyalty in service to Sergeant Thomas Bennett and the community of Oak Ridge," she announced. More applause followed, along with a few audible sniffles from the crowd. Thomas felt his own eyes growing moist. He'd never sought recognition for himself or for Max, but there was something profoundly validating about having their bond acknowledged so publicly. The formal ceremony concluded with the mayor's announcement that October 15th would henceforth be recognized as Service Animal Appreciation Day in Oak Ridge. As Thomas and Max made their way off the stage, they were surrounded by well-wishers, veterans, service dog handlers, community members, and journalists. Through it all, Max remained perfectly poised, accepting gentle pats when Thomas gave permission, otherwise maintaining his professional demeanor despite the excitement around them. "Sergeant Bennett?" A hesitant voice approached. Officer Mills, speaking to Thomas for the first time in public since the incident. "Officer," Thomas acknowledged, turning toward the voice. "Former officer," Mills corrected quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you again for what you said up there. It was more than generous." Thomas nodded. "How's the training program development coming along?" "Better than expected. We've partnered with the National Association of Service Dog Providers. They're helping us create a comprehensive module that can be adopted by departments nationwide." "Good," Thomas said sincerely. "That's good work." An awkward pause followed, neither man quite sure how to proceed. It was Max who broke the tension, turning slightly toward Mills and giving a soft woof, not a warning but something closer to recognition. "He remembers me," Mills said, surprise evident in his voice. "Max never forgets a scent," Thomas confirmed. "Or a person, good or bad." "I'm trying to be one of the good ones now," Mills said quietly. Thomas nodded. "That's all any of us can do. Keep trying, keep improving." As Mills moved away, Sarah approached with Lily in tow. "Ready for the reception at Veterans Corner? Jim's closed the cafe to the public, private party just for us and the folks from the ceremony." "Sounds perfect," Thomas agreed. He was tired but fulfilled, ready to celebrate in a more intimate setting with those who had supported them through the past month. The walk to Veterans Corner was familiar, the same route Thomas and Max had been taking that fateful morning. But today they moved through a town transformed. People called out greetings, no longer seeing just a blind man and his dog, but recognizing Thomas Bennett and Max, whose story had touched lives far beyond Oak Ridge. Jim Peterson had outdone himself at the cafe. The aroma of fresh-baked cookies and coffee greeted them as they entered, along with the buzz of conversation from guests who had arrived ahead of them. A special area had been set up for Max. A comfortable bed near Thomas's usual table, with a bowl of fresh water and what smelled suspiciously like the special treats Jim often snuck to the dog when he thought Thomas wouldn't notice. "Uncle Thomas," Lily tugged at his sleeve, "can I show Max his special surprise now, please?" "What special surprise?" Thomas asked, bemused. Sarah laughed. "Lily and her class made something for Max. It's been killing her to keep it secret." "Well, we can't have that," Thomas said solemnly. "Lead on, Miss Lily." His niece guided him to a table where something large and apparently unwieldy awaited. "It's a scrapbook," Lily explained excitedly. "But it's special. Ms. Johnson helped us make it with different textures so you can feel the pictures." Thomas reached out, his fingers encountering a thick book with an embossed cover. "To Max and Uncle Thomas," he read, tracing the raised letters. "From Ms. Johnson's second-grade class." "Open it," Lily urged. Thomas carefully turned the pages, his sensitive fingers discovering a tactile wonderland. Each page contained textured collages, soft fabric for Max's fur, rough sandpaper for sidewalks, smooth satin for the sky. Braille labels accompanied each image alongside traditional text for sighted readers. "This is incredible," Thomas said, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Did you help make all of this?" "The whole class did," Lily said proudly. "We worked on it every day for 2 weeks. Ms. Johnson said it's important to understand that different people experience the world in different ways." Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's absolutely right. This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given us." He knelt down, guiding Max's attention to the book, Look what Lily and her friends made for us, buddy. Max sniffed the book with interest, then gently licked Lily's hand in what Thomas knew was the dog's version of profound gratitude. The little girl giggled with delight. As the reception continued around them, Thomas found a quiet moment to sit with Colonel Hargrove, who had remained a steadfast ally throughout the past month. The program's expanding, Hargrove informed him quietly. Veterans' enhanced protection is being implemented nationwide. Your situation proved its value beyond any doubt. I'm glad some good came from it, Thomas replied. Though I'd still prefer not to have been tased, Hargrove chuckled. Fair enough. But you should know that applications for service dogs have increased threefold since your story went public. Veterans who might have been reluctant to acknowledge their need for assistance are coming forward. You've changed perceptions, Thomas, both of disability and of what these animals can provide. Thomas nodded, absently reaching down to stroke Max's head. The dog had settled contentedly at his feet, relaxed but still vigilant in the crowded cafe. It's strange, Thomas mused. When I lost my sight, I thought my usefulness was over, that I'd never serve a purpose again. Max gave me back my independence, but this past month has shown me something else, that our experiences, even the painful ones, can serve others in ways we never anticipated. That's the essence of service, Hargrove agreed, finding purpose in unexpected places. As the afternoon wore on, guests gradually departed until only close friends and family remained. Thomas found himself sitting at his usual corner table, Max dozing beside him, the sounds of familiar voices washing over him like a soothing tide. Sarah slid into the chair across from him, placing a fresh cup of coffee in his hands. "Penny for your thoughts, brother." Thomas smiled, wrapping his fingers around the warm mug. "Just thinking about roads traveled and those still ahead. About how Max and I started our walk that morning expecting nothing more than coffee and conversation and ended up changing laws." "Life's funny that way," Sarah observed. "Never quite what we expect." "No," Thomas agreed. "But sometimes it's better. Different, harder maybe, but better in ways we couldn't have imagined." Max stirred at his feet, rising to press his head against Thomas's knee, a check-in, a reminder of his constant presence. Thomas scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the new metal on his vest clink softly against the service animal tags. "You know what Dad used to say," Sarah reminisced. "The measure of a man isn't how he handles success, but how he rises after falling." "And sometimes," Thomas added softly, "it's about who helps you back to your feet." Outside the cafe windows, life in Oak Ridge continued, changed subtly but permanently by the events of the past month. Inside, a blind veteran and his German shepherd enjoyed a moment of perfect peace, their bond strengthened by adversity, their partnership a testament to the enduring power of loyalty and trust. Max sighed contentedly, settling back at Thomas's feet, ever vigilant, ever faithful. And Thomas knew with absolute certainty that whatever paths lay ahead, they would walk them together, one man and his dog navigating the world with courage, dignity, and unwavering devotion to each other. This story of Thomas and Max reminds us that even in our darkest moments, true loyalty never wavers. As we age, many of us understand what it means to face unexpected challenges, whether it's health issues, retirement adjustments, or watching loved ones struggle. But like Thomas, we can find purpose in our pain. Remember when everyday bonds between neighbors, family members, even a man and his dog were sacred? That America still exists in the connections we nurture daily. The German shepherd who stood by his handler despite being tased shows us that devotion transcends words, that some partnerships are forged by something deeper than convenience. For those of us who've lived long enough to know both loss and renewal, Max's unwavering loyalty touches a special place in our hearts. Has a faithful companion, human or animal, helped you through your toughest times? How did their loyalty change your perspective on what really matters? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that in a world where so much changes, the power of unconditional love remains our greatest comfort and strength.